I think that we can go ahead and get started now. Thank you all so much for coming to our Introduction to Electrification Workshop. This session is part of MCE's Workforce Education and Training Program and is the first in a series of electrification workshops offered by MCE and AEA focusing on energy efficiency and electrification. My name is Alexis Whitaker. I am from the Association for Energy Affordability, or AEA. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A and we'll read them out at a stopping point. There will also be time for questions at the end of the presentation. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer Green, the Manager of Customer Programs at MCE, for an introduction before Stephen Gribble from the Association for Energy Affordability starts the presentation.
Thanks, Alexis. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Green, as Alexis said. I manage several programs at MCE, formerly known as Marine Clean Energy, but now we encompass 4 counties in the Bay Area. So we're known fondly just as MCE. We at MCE provide electricity to over 500,000 customers in the Bay Area. We started in 2010 as the state's first community choice aggregator, which is an electricity provider that is formed and managed by local municipalities and our agency. Within the MCE, we run several energy efficiency programs and also distributed energy resource programs, as well as resource resiliency and electric vehicle infrastructure and technology programs. As Alexis said, this workshop is part of our Workforce Education and Training Program, and we're really excited to have all of you here to learn about electrification with Stephen, but also wanted to let you know, if you are a contractor that is interested in learning more about our Workforce Education and Training Program, including the opportunity to be a mentor to job seekers in the region, or if you are a job seeker looking for an entrance into the energy industry, please feel free to reach out to any of the people whose contact information is going to be listed at the end of the workshop. With that, I will pass it over to Stephen Gribble from AEA to kick us off. Thanks, Stephen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming this Wednesday afternoon. As previously stated, my name is Stephen Gribble, and I'm a project manager at the Association for Energy Affordability. There, among other things, I work to implement a number of building efficiency and electrification programs around the state, as well as providing direct consulting to buildings on clean energy and electrification practices. I'm here today as part of the MCE Clean Energy's new Workforce Education and Training Program designed to support high-performance buildings and the workforce needed to create them. Today's workshop is going to be the first in a series of workshops that we'll be hosting focusing on building electrification. The content today will serve as a broad overview of electrification, while future workshops will take a deeper dive into a variety of electrification topics and technologies. We can just start off with a little bit of housekeeping. Like Alexis said, she is the MC in helping to host this workshop. We encourage you to submit all of your questions and comments through the chat box. Alexis is going to kind of manage those, and depending on the topic and where we are in the workshop, we might stop and answer some of them, or we may address them as they come up. We also have some time set aside at the end for a Q&A, so if you don't get an immediate answer, don't fret. Quick questions or clarifications might also be responded to directly by her in the chat. With that, let's get started. So on the screen is today's agenda. We'll be going through each of these one by one. We'll discuss why we want to electrify our buildings and what is driving this shift. Heat pumps are one of the primary technologies that are enabling us to make these changes. So I'll provide a brief overview of what they are and how they work. I'll discuss 2 of the most common end uses that can be electrified: space conditioning and water heating. Then we'll take a look at appliances and how renewables fit into this discussion. There are also a wide variety of programs being deployed to support this shift. So we'll look at some of the MCE offerings and discuss how they work. And then finally, I'll just provide a few case studies for electrification projects that we've worked on here at AEA and show that this kind of stuff works. So let's start with the most fundamental piece, which is the question, what is electrification? Building electrification is the substitution of gas appliances like furnaces, water heaters, and cooking ranges, stoves, dryers, all those things, with clean, safe, and highly efficient all-electric alternatives. Through electrification, we can eliminate the use of fossil fuels in our homes and buildings, tackle climate change, improve the quality of our homes and buildings. By transitioning off of natural gas, we also reduce the tremendous amount of methane leakage that happens at all stages along the natural gas infrastructure, from extraction to pipelines. So why do we want to go all electric? For starters, it's safer. Eliminating gas gets rid of the primary source of carbon monoxide, which kills over 400 people a year and hospitalizes 50,000 people a year in the US. It also eliminates sources of gas leaks, which can cause explosions. Take the case of the Aliso Canyon gas leak. This was a leak in a distribution pipeline in Southern California that is said to have had a larger carbon footprint than the Deepwater Horizon oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico, the BP oil leak. It's healthier. It eliminates indoor and outdoor pollution like nitrous oxide. Gas cooking is particularly bad for indoor quality and health, which is borne out by recent studies conducted by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, showing increased rates of asthma in homes with gas cooking versus electric cooking. It's climate friendly. When combined with low carbon or renewable electricity, we can significantly reduce and sometimes eliminate the carbon impact of our buildings. Resiliency. All modern gas equipment actually uses electricity. And electricity is typically restored faster after disaster-related outages. Take, for example, our California example of the earthquake. Due to the risk of explosion, gas infrastructure has to be carefully inspected after such an event, which can take considerable time. Electrical infrastructure is typically much quicker to bring back online. Finally, it's less expensive than new construction. There's been a lot of cost effectiveness studies in California showing that new construction costs for all electric buildings versus gas buildings for nearly every climate zone and building type is cheaper. Some electric upgrades are typically required and the equipment is slightly more expensive, but we get to save on gas main extensions, connection costs, meters, gas piping, combustion safety testing, and in most cases, just flat out cheaper to operate too. So to understand electrification, we need to understand where and how gas is consumed in our buildings. This chart represents the different gas end uses across a typical residence in California. So water heating is by far the biggest slice of the pie. Heating water is one of the most energy intensive things that we do, and the typical household uses a large amount of hot water on a daily basis, 365 days a year. Next is going to be space heating and using a furnace. We're fortunate to live in a very temperate region of the world that has minimal heating requirements when compared against someplace like Minnesota, or someplace where it actually gets cold. Space heating is again another very energy intensive task, but luckily we only need to do it for a select portion of the year. And someplace colder, you might find water heating and space heating swapped. Cooking benefits from being utilized a relatively small portion of the time, usually in the scheme of like 1 to 2 hours per day. And an oven might actually have a similar heat output to that of a small furnace. Pools and spas take a large amount of energy to heat, but the majority of folks don't have pools, and the ones that do tend to heat them for only a small portion of the year, so it makes up a relatively small piece of the pie. And then finally, we have gas dryers. Like other smaller end uses, dryers see just less runtime overall and resultingly make up a relatively small portion of the pie. However, they do again have a similar heat output to that of a small furnace. So looking at all these end uses, there are some obvious areas for us to tackle first to get the most bang for a buck and to be able to have the largest impact. So I kind of also just want to make the point that this type of work is already happening across the state. These are all pictures of new cutting-edge all-electric developments. Some of these are affordable income-restricted housing, and some of these are market rate. I really think that the deployment of cost-effective, all-electric, affordable developments should really act as a signal that this is possible in all building sectors, as affordable developments are typically the most cost-constrained. So if they can do it, pretty much anyone can. So can we really do this all with electricity? Space heating, cooking, water heating, laundry, pools? Yes, yes we can. The answer is an emphatic yes. Through this workshop, we're gonna look closer at some of the ways that we can accomplish this, and we'll dive deeper into some of those areas in future workshops. So just to kind of like set the table, let's look at some of the specific climate policies that are driving and accelerating their adoption. Today, there are more than 32 local REACH codes that either favor or require all-electric new construction. The city of Berkeley is a great example, having recently adopted legislation prohibiting new natural gas infrastructure in buildings. On a regional level, the advent of community choice aggregation have given people across the state and how their energy is generated. MCE Clean Energy was actually the first of its kind in California and has served as an example of how successful and powerful this approach can be for communities. At the state level, we have adopted legislation that mandates a doubling of energy efficiency standards and that 50% of our electricity come from renewable sources by 2030. That same legislation mandates that by 2050, the state achieve carbon neutrality and that 100% of our electricity come from renewable sources. So these are the policy drivers that are behind the move towards electrification. So how do we electrify those large end uses that we identified earlier? By technology that we actually all already pretty much have in our homes, heat pumps. So the obvious question then is, what the heck is a heat pump? Well, I can tell you that all of the items here operate using some form of a heat pump. A heat pump is a device that moves heat from one place to another using a refrigerant. This is exactly what your refrigerator or air conditioning is doing when it makes something cold. It's literally pumping heat from inside of a space, your refrigerator or your home, to outside of that space. And what's so great about heat pumps? Well, they are hyper efficient. Where a gas appliance is a chemical reaction releasing energy in the form of heat, a heat pump is simply moving energy from one space to another. So it's not converting anything, it's just simply moving it around. They make zero net energy buildings possible when coupled with renewable electricity. They produce no localized emissions, dramatically improving indoor air quality. There are quantifiable safety improvements. Nothing's going to blow up, and there's no chance of getting carbon monoxide poisoning while you sleep because they produce no carbon monoxide. The majority of the homes in San Francisco Bay Area were not built with cooling because it's a coastal climate and doesn't get that hot. But the last few years, the number of days where I've told myself, oh, it'd be kind of nice to have air conditioning has increased. Heat pumps provide both heating and cooling from the same device, just de facto. And they will work in all climate zones present in California. So how does it actually work? If we think back to high school physics, you might recall that in nature, things move from high concentrations to low concentrations. It's a fairly basic principle that governs a lot of modern life. It's what makes airplanes fly, water move through plumbing, and the refrigerant cycle that enables air conditioners, heat pumps, and refrigerators to work. In other words, high pressure areas will flow to low pressure areas and attempt to normalize. So if we again go back to high school, you'll recall that if we compress something or increase the pressure on it, that thing heats up. And conversely, if we reduce the pressure on it, it will cool. In the refrigerant cycle, by altering the pressure on the refrigerant, we can change its temperature such that it either absorbs heat from or rejects heat to the outdoors. An air conditioner or refrigerator can only operate that cycle in one direction and reject heat, while the heat pump can actually reverse that cycle and absorb heat, allowing it to provide both heating and cooling. So modern heat pumps utilize refrigerants capable of operating at extremely low temperatures that make them suitable for nearly any climate. So modern heat pumps can operate to well below freezing, which is to say that they will work in any climate zone in California and really the vast majority of climate zones. Electric space conditioning. So shown here are some residential flavored pieces of equipment. Heat pumps exist in a wide variety of form factors and can easily replace any kind of existing system. For buildings with existing ductwork, there are ducted heat pump options that can utilize existing or new ductwork. Where building design or desires limit ductwork, there are a variety of ductless options. The ductless form factor is extremely commonplace in both Europe and Asia. And then there are also packaged terminal heat pumps that can sleeve through a wall, like you might find in like a hotel room or something like that. So this is an example of a ducted heat pump replacement in an existing building. Because the ductwork already existed, the owner opted to reuse it. The picture on the right shows the new air handler as well as duct leakage testing equipment. The same principles about well-sealed ductwork apply here as they would in a gas-based system. Where existing ductwork can't be reused or where ductwork does not already exist, ductless mini-split pumps, heat pumps, are an option. They have an outdoor unit similar to a ducted system. However, rather than running a refrigerant line to an air handler and then distributing hot and cold through the airstream that way, refrigerant lines are run directly to a head unit that can be mounted on the wall, as shown in this picture, or ceiling mounted in a cassette for a little bit less obtrusive of an installation. And then we also have package terminal options as well that might make more sense in some situations where siting an outdoor unit might be challenging. Hotels are the most obvious applications, but we have seen these installed in a wide variety of residential applications as well.
Stephen, we just had a question come through about refrigerants. The question is, what about the toxicity of refrigerants? What's the life of the product and how likely is leakage?
So leakage it's just the same as a normal air conditioner. As long as the line set is correctly installed, it's a sealed system, there should be no leakage of refrigerant. If there is any leakage, there's been a failure somewhere in the system. The expected life is going to be typically the same as like a regular air conditioner would be. As far as the refrigerants, these are all modern refrigerants with low global warming potential and low ozone depletion potential. Some of them even use carbon dioxide. So these are all safe refrigerants. They don't pose any explosion risk, low global warming potential, and low ozone depletion potential. So remember I said with heat pumps, you also get cooling. So it's kind of a free bonus. If you didn't have cooling before, now you do. For larger and more complex spaces, there are a variety of options. While not super commonplace here, for buildings with simultaneous heating and cooling loads, like maybe on a building where the south side of the building just really cooks, just right in the sun all day. The people on that side of the building are just getting blasted, they need air conditioning. Whereas maybe on the north side of the building, it's cold, they're not getting direct sun, they might want heat at the same time. Heat recovery chillers, which is what's there on the left, sort of function as a magic box by being able to utilize the waste streams of hot and cold and then pumping them around the building, resulting in a very efficient operation. They're a little bit challenging. We don't see them too often, but it is an option. Here we have packaged rooftop heat pumps, and these are really common in commercial spaces and some multifamily dwellings. These tend to be the lowest first cost approach and typically fall on the lower end of the efficiency spectrum, but they're generally super easy equipment switches to make. The form factor is matched very well to existing packaged products. We also have variable refrigerant flow, or VRF systems. These are extremely high efficiency ways to centralize heating and cooling needs in a building while being able to meet variable loads in multiple different spaces. By being able to vary the amount of working fluid or refrigerant at any given time, these systems are able to adjust their capacity and meet variable loads in a very efficient manner. These are really common in apartment spaces where each unit can function as its own independently controllable zone. Because they're a little more complex and the buildings that they tend to be sited on are larger, You'll typically require an engineer to provide, ensure proper design and function, but they can be hyper efficient when implemented correctly. So some of the key considerations for utilizing heat pumps for your HVAC is doing heat loss or load calcs rather than using rules of thumb or existing equipment as sizing guidelines. Load and heat loss calc should be performed to ensure correct system sizing. Over or undersizing equipment can have really significant increased operating costs and also significantly shorten equipment lifespan. So we want to make sure that the equipment is sized correctly for the building and not just a direct replacement for whatever was there before. Sometimes backup heat strips can be needed. If you are in a really cold climate zone, it might be required that you need a backup heat strip. Consult with the manufacturer or the engineer to help determine if this is going to be the case in your building. Pretty much most Bay Area climate zones can get away with not using a backup heat strip, but if you live in the mountains or someplace, you might need one. And then quality ductwork. Poorly designed duct system will every time defeat an otherwise well-designed HVAC system. So the same principles apply if you're distributing your heat and cold through a ducted airstream. Just make sure that the duct system is adequately designed. The other large end use we ID'd was water heating. So now we'll kind of talk through some of the options for electrifying water heating systems in your building. Individual residential flavored water heaters can be broadly broken up into two categories. The first are split systems where the compressor lives outdoors and then feeds a storage tank indoors. And then the second type are combined systems where the compressor sits on top of the storage tank. These water heaters can be used in single family dwellings or apartments where each resident has their own water heater. Some particular nuances when doing these in multifamily buildings. Those water heaters are typically located in internal or external closets, and they kind of sometimes tend to be a little small. So there might be ducting or space constraints there that you'll have to think about. Potentially also there's limited electrical panel capacity and breaker space. So again, that's something you need to ID. Make sure that you have sufficient space in your panel. They can potentially have more complexity for dedicated circuit runs. Some of these water heaters are Wi-Fi connected to be able to do load shifting. And when there's tenant turnover and associated changes in Wi-Fi, that can get a little bit sticky. And then a lot of apartments have fewer water fixtures in a single family home, but higher occupancy densities relative to single family. So sizing is important to make sure that there's enough hot water capacity to be able to adequately meet the demand in a multifamily residence. The electrical issues really should only be a challenge in retrofit buildings. So it's a non-issue in new construction where you can plan specifically for it. These are some examples of single-family flavored heat pump installations. Here is a ducted one in an exterior closet. This is a ducted combination system in an interior closet. One of the things to note in these pictures is that there is ducting leading out of the systems. This is because cold air is a byproduct of heating the water, and in enclosed spaces such as a water heater closet, that cold air needs a way to exit. Otherwise, the system efficiency can be dramatically reduced as the air that's being exchanged and heat extracted from gets colder. So make sure you refer to the manufacturer's specs for information on ducting and fresh air exchange requirements. Ducting can typically be eliminated by placing the unit in a large enough space or by utilizing a fully louvered door to allow for ample air exchange. But again, check with the manufacturer. Moving on to bigger, more complex buildings, there are a wide variety of products available for larger centralized hot water systems. They operate with the same principles, but have higher compressor capacities, and that's to be able to more adequately heat larger volumes of water more rapidly. There are a lot of ways these systems can be sliced and diced, so we'll just kind of talk about a few basic examples of different configurations. This is a central system manufactured by Colmac utilizing one compressor and I believe 240 gallons of storage, of hot water storage. This is another system manufactured by Colmac, but instead utilizing 2 smaller compressors and then a similar volume of hot water storage. The 2 compressors here can act as stages with only one operating during periods of low demand and minimal recovery needs, and then both turning on in periods of high demand. With regards to varying capacity, a lot of these projects are also available with variable speed compressors, so they can potentially function at a variable capacity on their own, but that's oftentimes an add that's additional cost adder that would need to be integrated. This is a system manufactured by Sandin, where multiple smaller compressors have been ganged together, resulting again in a high degree of modularity and again variable capacity. So not all of these necessarily need to be running at the same time. It could be as low as 1 or all of them. It just kind of depends on what the load and the demands of the building are at any given time. And then this is a similarly configured system by Sandin, but trading off less compressors for considerably more hot water storage. So again, like I said, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of slice and dice and design these things, and there are trade-offs to be made between more storage and more compressor capacity and electrical needs. So these are kind of things that you'll want to take into consideration. On projects of this size, you'll typically have an engineer involved, but make sure that you're kind of talking through different permutations. And then just kind of to give you a sense of the size and scale of buildings where this is possible, this is a UCSF building utilizing 4 massive heat pumps manufactured by Nile. And then the amount of storage is, I believe, 3 1,000-gallon storage tanks. So there's a very significant amount of hot water capacity at this building. This is a big, fancy academic building. That's being served entirely by a heat pump hot water heating system. So some of the considerations that you need to think about for heat pump hot water heaters are they're typically large amperage units or 3-phase equipments. So you need to make sure there's adequate electrical capacity. You need to think about the distance from the closest panel on scattered sites. So if you have a property where you have multiple buildings or a campus or something, you need to think about where you're going to be able to pull power from. And then transformers. You're adding new load to the building, potentially, if it's an existing building. So we need to engage early with the utility to make sure that there's no transformer upgrades that are going to be required or triggered through the added loads. Space. So you're going to need a high volume of storage, typically. You need a place to put that. Water weighs a lot. You need to make sure that structurally it's adequate. And then you need to think about where you're going to actually put the heat pumps themselves. These types of systems also typically involve recirculation loops. So those add a little extra wrinkle to heat pump hot water heating. They typically will have higher return temperatures and flow rates and constant loads. So it's something that needs to be thought about and integrated into the hot water heating system. Multifamily presents a pretty interesting opportunity for heat pump hot water heating. Individual apartments with water heaters, only 11% of them are unitary electric systems. So the change from a resistant electric to a heat pump is significant, but it's not as significant as the switch from a gas appliance to a heat pump appliance. So 39% of those apartments are going to be unitary gas. So those are like really good targets. And then central hot water heating systems, about 50% of those are central gas. So again, those are really good targets too. Other applications in multifamily would be water heaters serving only laundry rooms. That's super common to have just a dedicated water heater for the laundry room. So that's another target area. And then pools and spas. So AEA primarily works in multifamily buildings, so that's kind of the lens that we view things through typically, but these larger central units can just as easily be used for other non-residential applications like office buildings, gymnasiums, academic buildings like you saw in the UCSF photo. This is kind of just a general sizing guideline of how you might think about what type of product you would need to serve a certain number of apartments. So on a small number of apartments, you could probably actually get away with a single individual tank type heat pump hot water heater. On maybe like 10 to 25 apartments, you have some options about which route you want to take. And then on big buildings, you're typically going to need a large heat pump hot water heater and a large volume of storage. So again, some more design considerations. Optimal sizing will likely have more storage than gas-based systems. That's pretty typical. The engineer should not be using the same sizing parameters as hot water systems. The reason why you need more storage is that you might think of a typical gas water heater as like using like a flamethrower, and a heat pump as like more of a simmer setting. So the recovery time is slower. So to offset that, by having more storage that we can draw down on, we're able to provide more hot water. So the trade-off is lower recovery time, but more storage. So engage with heat pump manufacturers to obtain their sizing recommendations. They typically will have a calculator where you can kind of evaluate those trade-offs of storage versus compressor capacity. Individual systems may be located inside of a unit potentially with no outside air, depending on the system. Some are designed that way, but you need to confirm with the manufacturer. And then larger central systems are pretty much always going to need access to outside or garage air. If space is tight, they can be ducted, but it's typically not as preferred as having it be access to the open air. This is a project that we did, central heat pump water heater. We got about 65% energy savings, 82% gas reduction. This is a property located in Fresno that was able to switch their central domestic hot water heater from gas to heat pump. So you can see the change in the pre and the post is really significant. These things work. I'm not sure what the leftover gas actually is this property. I think it might have been the pool. So how do we fit renewables into all of this? So we have, for the buildings we work on-site renewables are broadly broken into two different categories, solar PV and solar thermal. PV stands for photovoltaics and can generate electricity, whereas solar thermal utilizes energy in the sun's radiation to directly heat up water. The question that I like to ask is if a solar thermal system breaks in a forest, does anybody know? And the answer is probably not. I can't not count the number of abandoned, non-functioning solar thermal systems that I've encountered over the course of my career. It's seen many more non-functioning ones than I have seen functioning ones. So while it's true that from a physics perspective on a per square foot basis, solar thermal is more efficient at converting the sun's radiation, it also kind of has a lot working against it as it relates to electrification. It requires a good deal of careful integration into a heat pump hot water heating system to ensure good performance, to the point where it's kind of considered an added significant design complication. Also, solar thermal involves moving parts, which over time will fail and result in maintenance needs. My first job out of college was actually working for a solar thermal manufacturer. So while I'm generally actually a really big fan of the concept and the technology, you got to recognize that its utility as a subsystem on these types of buildings is somewhat limited. So solar PV has no moving parts, and then it can potentially offset all of the loads on small buildings. It also simplifies things. There's only one renewable system instead of two. It won't impact heat pump hot water heating design. It should be monitored performance, but that's kind of par for the course for any PV system installed these days. Solar thermal, on the other hand, like I said, does have moving parts. It involves pumps and moving fluids around, and at most, it's only going to be able to offset maybe 60 or 70% of the hot water load at any building. All solar thermal systems involve backup systems as well. It's just not, there's just not enough sunlight 365 days a year. Sometimes it's overcast. PV plus thermal complicates buildings because now you have two renewable systems that you need to manage. And again, like I said, it requires really careful integration with the heat pump hot water heating design. So really, generally, solar PV is going to be the best approach for all electric buildings. Electric cooking. Electric cooking seems to be one of the hardest nuts for us to crack for electrification because electric cooktops have a really bad rap. Resultingly, my mother has immediately shot down every attempt my father has made to electrify their kitchen. Even though Julia Childs used an electric kitchen on her cooking show, which I think was actually more a function of the logistics of running gas lines in a TV studio full of electronic equipment that might create sparks. But most people dramatically prefer a gas cooktop for a wide variety of performance-based reasons. That doesn't come without cost, though. As previously alluded to, gas cooktops account for increased rates of asthma and decreased indoor air quality, particularly in kitchens without ducted range exhaust like my house. However, induction cooktops take everything you know and hate about cheap electric stoves in your apartment and throw it out the window, or should I say properly recycle it. Rather than running a current through a coil and using the heat produced by that coil's resistance, induction cooktops utilize a magnetic field shifting back and forth to directly heat a pan or other cooking device in contact with the cooktop. So this is actually a real picture from a demonstration about induction cooktops. The only thing that gets heated is the actual pan. So while the pan heats up and radiates, other items on the same surface directly adjacent to it will not. That piece of chocolate directly adjacent to the pan is not melting because it's not being heated. So what's so great about it? It's got a faster response time than even gas. So when you turn the knob up or down, it responds immediately, right? That's one of the big knocks against the typical electric resistance stove is that they are really slow to respond. When you turn the knob down, it takes, a measurable amount of time for the flame to be reduced. They can boil water in like half of the time of other heating types because the heat source is direct to the cooking vessel. The amount of heat that they can deploy is extremely precise down to very low levels. And there's less waste heat. So a lot of what's happening on a typical cooktop is that you're heating the air around the pot that's on top of the cooktop, right? So because you're not doing it anymore, your kitchen's gonna stay cooler. And then safety. There's no open flames and only the pan gets hot. You could put your hand down on the cooktop and it's not gonna get burned even after it's been on. Pretty incredible. So what about cost? Yes, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. Induction is currently not going to be the cheapest thing available, but there are semi-reasonably priced induction products available. And as adoption continues to accelerate, prices should come down and become more comparable. The other thing is that you do need compatible cookware. So pots and pans must be ferromagnetic. That means like iron or steel with like a coil in it. So that's a lot of cookware is ferromagnetic. You might find cheaper cookware is not, but this $26 cookware set from Amazon, will work. So there are cheaper products that are available, and if you want, fancy cookware, it will typically work. So that means cast iron pans work, sandwich bottom pans, all that kind of stuff. So there are lots of affordable options. You could also get fancy with it if you want to. So all electric commercial kitchens do exist and can be found actually in a wide variety of locations. While I've never actually been on one of the earliest adopters of all electric commercial kitchens were cruise ships with fine dining establishments on them. Their motivations are a little bit different in that fire on the ocean could definitely be catastrophic. So removing flames from those ships is actually a safety measure, but it's proof positive that it can be done in a really high-end setting and effectively done. Actually, in another lifetime, I spent some time working in a kitchen, and I can tell you that it gets super duper hot in there, and that they typically are not air conditioned. And I actually live with a fine dining chef who works in Berkeley, and in light of their gas ban, it's been a conversation topic in our house a few times. For him, the biggest selling point is that, like I said, rather than heating the air around a pan, induction heats the pan itself, which results in a dramatically cooler and more pleasant working environment. Like a commercial kitchen is like hot, it's intense. So like any way that they can reduce the amount of heat going into that space is like, they're like, whoa, that's pretty cool. So yes, we can. What about laundry, dryers? So electric resistance dryers have been around for a long time and are obviously a viable alternative to gas-based dryers. Relatively recently, heat pump dryers have become available domestically and can do the same thing, but just use a lot less electricity. One of the bonuses is that because heat pump dryers use a less extreme dry heat source, they will typically degrade your clothing less than a standard electric dryer. Both typical heat pump and resistance dryers will need a 220/240 outlet, so that might be an impediment in some locations. Where that's not an option, new combination washer and dryer products that utilize a standard 120 volt outlet are available. So that's just like the regular outlet that you have, on your kitchen countertop or wherever through your house that you plug your TV into. These products are pretty common in like mobile homes and space-constrained apartments. It is worth noting that they do dry slower than other options because they're doing so with less voltage, and they add maybe 30 minutes to the drying cycle over a comparable standalone heat pump dryer. I think the biggest challenge is that their combined nature means that you can't start a new wash cycle until the previous one is done drying. So it can kind of, laundry day might be a little bit long, but they're definitely an option, and people do use them. And then commercial resistance dryers are readily available from most suppliers. Commercial heat pump dryers are pretty common in Europe and are listed on US manufacturer pages. Like I know Speed Queen is a common commercial equipment manufacturer, and they list heat pump dryer on their website, but I don't think that it's really widely available here in the US, but we've been told that they're coming soon. So that's an option to keep your eye out for if you manage a space that needs a commercial clothes dryer. So what about pools and spas? These are already able to provide significant utility bill cost over gas. The major nuance is the recovery issue. Like I mentioned for regular domestic water heating, the recovery rate's slower. So at the start of the season, when you need to heat up a really large volume of water, you kind of just have to plan for it. But they do well at maintaining a temp once it's achieved. So with adequate planning, that can be a good solution. Solar thermal is also a pool heating option as well. That might not necessarily involve a heat pump. Electric vehicle charging. So California, Tesla, the EV resolution is here, and for new and existing buildings, it makes sense to be ready for it. A lot of state and local jurisdictions actually already have requirements for EV charging in new buildings. So on new construction buildings, you need to size for electrical service and infrastructure for EV future to reduce service upgrades down the road. Just want to plan for these things. Even if you're not going to put it there initially, make sure that the electrical service that you're putting in your projects are sized such that in the future you could add these loads without having to upgrade your electrical infrastructure again. Battery storage. What about battery storage? So battery storage systems are pretty widely available and cost effective for many building types, particularly when combined with solar PV. Power outages are a real thing now. Even with a solar system on your building, if the grid goes down, you're going to lose electricity. Any grid-tied system is going to go down if the grid goes down. Batteries can improve resiliency, though, by powering those critical systems during a utility outage. So where you would lose power otherwise, the battery system might enable you to, say, keep your elevators running, or your building cooled, or your food from spoiling. Right, so they pair really well with solar PV systems. They can also reduce peak electrical charges by load shifting. So on larger properties with demand charges, by shifting our loads, we're able to smooth and flatten our demand curve. And that can result in considerable cost savings. They definitely don't work for all project types, but it's definitely worth considering and looking into, and there typically are considerable incentives available to help kind of buy down the cost. Electric infrastructure. So really, we need more electricity than we do for gas-based systems. All electric buildings eliminate gas costs. Like I said, main extension, meters, interconnection fees, in-building infrastructure. There's considerable cost savings with not putting gas infrastructure in new buildings. So with all systems powered by electricity, projects they need a larger electrical service typically. So if capacity is a concern, consult with an electrical engineer early on and relay your objectives so that any potential issues can be ID'd on the front end instead of on the back end. Always better to be proactive than reactive. It's worth talking about some of the potential challenges you might encounter during electrification projects. So I kind of talked a little bit about it, but electrical upgrades, right? So on existing buildings, you're adding an electrical load to the building. You need space for potentially new dedicated breakers, and you need capacity to add that load. If you have an old panel that's already full, that might be a challenge. You might have to upgrade your service panel, just something to be aware of. Building modifications might be needed in some cases. Like we said, the upfront cost for this equipment tends to be a little bit higher than a comparable gas-based equipment. Trade-off being lower operating cost, lower life cycle cost. Just general consumer knowledge, really. These are somewhat new to the marketplace. People aren't as familiar with them. Conceptually, lighting something on fire to heat something else up, it just kind of like makes sense to our human brain. Like hot things make things hot, you know? This is something that involves a little bit of technology, so it's a little bit more complicated on a consumer level, just something that people aren't as familiar with. So there's a little bit of, you know, instruction that has to happen. Same thing for contractors. It's like I said, it's a new technology. Contractors tend to want to do what they know how to do unless pushed. And so, you know, the contractor base just isn't as familiar typically with these types of products, although increasingly we're finding that they make up a larger portion of the work that contractors are doing. System sizing, like I mentioned, sizing these is a little bit different than conventional. So you need to kind of think about, you know, the different considerations for how do you size things. How much water heating storage do you need? How much compressor capacity do you need? It's a little bit different when sizing these systems than with standard gas-based approaches that we historically have maybe used rules of thumb or kind of that sort of thing. We really want to, like, you know, calculate these things out and make them pretty exacting. And also, you know, there's just a range of options. There's like a lot of different choices. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to that. On some level, you know, it might be a little bit of information paralysis and like too much, but also a lot of choices mean that, like I said, there's a lot of different ways that you can slice and dice and, you know, design these things to specifically meet your needs. So I would not necessarily call that a challenge, but just something to be aware of. So electrification programs are actually really important in driving adoption of this approach early on. So we'll kind of talk about some of the program offerings available from MCE and then just more broadly, electrification programs. So we have, for building programs, we have both whole building and then we have individual measure-based programs. And then within that, we have income qualified and then just general buildings. So, you know, affordable apartments are going to have access to different programs and funding sources than, say, a market rate apartment will. The difference between a whole building and an individual measure approach is that on a whole building program, you'll need to do multiple measures and kind of think about the building as a system. An individual measure is like kind of a widget-based approach, typically $1,000 for doing X, Y, or Z. We also have direct install programs, which you might have been familiar with. That's like typically someone comes and, you know, puts in LED light bulbs or weather stripping or sort of that stuff where there's just a direct install model from a utility. Those aren't utilized as much with electrification since they tend to be larger pieces of equipment that are less conducive to that approach, but in some cases they exist. There are midstream incentives where maybe a utility is subsidizing the cost at the retail level. I know in Southern California, Edison territory right now, if you go into Home Depot and buy a heat pump hot water heater, I think the out-the-door cost is $200 or something like that against, you know, maybe $1,200 or something. The incentive is already cooked into the retail price. So that's one way that another way that programs are deployed. And then there's also new construction programs as well with a whole wide variety of funding types. So some of the things that drive electrification program participation are kind of like what we said earlier, like why are people doing this work? You know, we compare electrification with existing or new solar PV. We get cleaner air, it's safer. There are demonstrable bill savings, energy and environmental equity. It improves the air quality, both locally and regionally. You kind of get a 2-for-1 when you replace your AC. You get heating and cooling. We get to remove gas meters. There's cost savings there, and then you only have one utility to manage. Less of an issue in areas like PG&E where you have a joint utility, but in Southern California, there are places where you have you have a gas utility and then you have a separate electrical utility. So this way, you only have to engage with one. Buildings are always going to have electricity. It's just kind of like it's there. And early adopters get to take advantage of higher rebates, and who knows what future regulations look like, but the landscape is what it is right now, so you get to take advantage of the current set of regulations. So some of the MCE electrification programs are listed below. There is the LIFT program, which is low-income families and tenants. There is also the MFES program, which is a multifamily energy savings program for multifamily buildings. They have a battery storage program. There is the Advanced Energy Rebuild NAPA program, which I believe is focused on fire recovery efforts. And then there is a heat pump hot water heater specific program as well. We have, like I said, midstream. There's a midstream heat pump hot water heater program. This program offers up to $1,000 paid directly to a licensed contractor for replacing their customers' natural gas or propane water heaters with high efficiency heat pumps. So this goes directly to the contractor. Don't have to kind of shuffle any paperwork. It's really streamlined. The MFES program provides incentives for energy efficiency upgrades. So these must be located in MCE's service territory and have 4 or more units. Income qualified properties can receive up to $1,200 per unit for in-unit upgrades under the low-income families and tenants program, in addition to the MFES money. This program can be combined with the low-income weatherization program, which is a state of California program, or the Bay Area Multifamily Building Enhancements Program. MCE has a battery storage program. MCE will help you apply for funds through the Self-Generation Incentive Program, known as SGIP, to help pay for the cost of your project. These funds can often cover 50 to even 100% of the total cost of the energy storage system, so it can be pretty juicy. Customers receive a monthly bill credit of $10 to $20 a month in exchange for allowing MCE to program the energy storage system. So this is kind of where that demand control option comes into play, and sort of connectivity by being able to receive signals from a utility that say, oh, we need to shift our load. That's kind of how these things work. Just smart to do energy efficiency and electrification together. So most of the programs that are driving electrification are also attempting to drive energy efficiency. By reducing our loads, we can make equipment smaller, it's easier, it's cheaper. It's almost always going to be cheaper to reduce your demand than it is to meet new demand. So high performance building envelopes and ventilation systems mean that you can put in smaller heat pumps for space heating. Efficient plumbing fixtures and distribution systems mean that we potentially have smaller and simpler heat pump hot water heaters. And then that also lets us put in smaller renewable energy systems, which, they're not cheap. So the smaller the renewable energy system we can install, there's positive cost savings there. These are some case studies before and afters of projects that went through the low-income weatherization program that I referenced earlier. On the left set of bar charts is energy usage, and the right set of bar charts is cost savings. So one is like energy and one is dollars. And everyone listed here, there is significant and demonstrable energy savings, as well as significant operational expenditure savings. These projects save both money and energy. So, it's like really it's a win for everybody, typically. These are two other projects located in Sacramento. They again did a domestic hot water switch where they went from a gas to a heat pump, and then unitary HVAC, so gas furnace and AC. That energy use is not included in the graph. This graph is only common area data, but the difference between the pre and the post is pretty stark. It's like a pretty substantial drop off. And then again, on the right-hand side, we have cost savings. So again, there's really significant cost savings associated with these things as well. So it's not just like, there's a level of altruism there and trying to do the right thing, but also, money talks, and, these things are considerably cheaper to operate than a gas-based system. So, you kind of kill two birds with one stone. You can save some money and you can try to save the planet too. So just, in conclusion, the all-electric future is here. Many jurisdictions have already passed or are considering policies that favor all-electric buildings and new construction. Starting now in California, any new gas infrastructure will be considered a stranded asset before it's fully paid off. Like, you put these things in and they're going to be there for a long time, but the state's moving in a different direction. So it really doesn't make sense to put in new gas infrastructure anymore. And then as building electrification accelerates, fewer and fewer gas customers are going to end up sharing the burden of fixed system costs and distribution and infrastructure, and it's going to result in increased gas rates, considerably over time. So, this is a hedge against, that future. Lastly, I just kind of wanted to say thanks. This is a picture of me on an electric Zamboni. I learned to drive a Zamboni in high school, and our machines ran on diesel, and they would leave like a haze over the ice, and I would come off the machine and be like loopy from huff and fumes. But electric is an option. The future's here. So go forth and do good things. And then if you guys have any questions, I'll hang around for a little bit. I don't know if there's anything in the chat box, Alexis, or...
No, the chat box is currently free. We also have the option, if you want to raise your hand, then you can unmute your audio that way. And so you can, kind of have a bit more of a conversation here at the end for the last Q&A.
Somebody's got to have a question.
The Q&A is clear, and I don't see any hands raised. We'll obviously hang around for a little bit longer if anybody has any questions. Thank you so much.
Even there were a few questions that were put into the Q&A that I tried to answer kind of as things went along. If you want to maybe pop that open and just see if you have anything to add. Sure. It looks... And it looks like there is a new question, which is, when do contractors get involved in the process? Are they involved in scope of work, or is AEA doing that?
So AEA does not do any work. We run programs like electrification and efficiency programs, and then we provide consulting to both owners and contractors about how to do this kind of work effectively. Really, the best time to engage, your contractor or even us is as early as possible. In new construction projects, you really want to ID this as a goal and an objective as early on as possible, so that you can drive the design in that direction. It's much easier to be, like I said, proactive than reactive, and changes down the road, can be expensive. So, design it once and do it right, up front.
Stephen, we have another very specific question. Someone says, if I want to retrofit my home and replace multiple appliances at once, could a single correctly sized heat pump serve a hot water heater, HVAC, and swimming pool heating?
So they have these things that are pretty common in Europe, basically called like magic boxes. But if you remember on the commercial side, I referenced a device that can both do simultaneous heating and cooling. Those sort of like magic boxes, they don't really exist here in the US yet, but they are capable of doing both water heating and space conditioning from the same box. Pool heating is sort of a different beast. I don't know. I don't think that those devices would be able to do that. Water heating, pool heating is very different, and it's just such a large volume of water, and that it's not insulated or typically covered in any way. So pools are one of the harder things to implement, but there are devices that can do both water heating and space heating. It might be a little bit hard to find domestically here for the time being, but they do exist.
We also have a question, will the recording be shared? We weren't planning, I think, to share the recording, but we can definitely look into it. We'll make sure to follow up with any relevant materials that we discussed today. And as long as you signed up through Eventbrite, your email should be already in the list. If it's not, feel free, I think you can contact the organizer through Eventbrite and then just let us know if there's anything you have any additional questions about or any resources we mentioned that you might also want access to.
And then, Alexis, do you happen to have the schedule handy for the workshops? Or do you know what the next one is off the top of your head?
No, a lot of them have not been scheduled yet. So most of them will be coming in 2021. Once that is available, we'll definitely make sure to publicize it. So whatever channel you heard about the workshop through today, you'll likely be able to find more information about the future workshops. And once we have a full schedule, we'll make that available as well.
And there was another question put in the chat asking about programs for Orange County, California. And someone recommended reaching out to the Clean Power Alliance. Yeah, we do have, there are programs in Southern California. Stephen mentioned Southern California Edison, but you'll maybe check with your local utility and go that route, or if you have a CCA where you are. I know there are more CCAs popping up in Southern California, but maybe not as many as well established as in Northern California.
One thing that I know is not currently available, but will be available soon in Southern California is from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, SCACMD. They are putting together a program, electrification program, that we're actually going to be implementing. I don't know what the timeline is for that to be live. It's been in development for a while, but that is coming. And that's going to be a pretty juicy electrification program, specifically serving Southern California.
Any further questions?
Questions are my favorite part. Bring them on.
Yeah, we are hoping to have one of these electrification workshops specifically be a question and answer session. So I'm going to go ahead and assume everybody's saving them up for a future workshop to bring them for full discussion. Of course, like I said, you should be able to reach out to the organizers through Eventbrite. You know, those messages will come to us. So we can definitely answer any further questions as they arrive.
Yeah, we're still putting the details together for that Q&A session. But one of, like Alexis said, one of these workshops is going to be specifically a Q&A. So if you have like, you know, specific project questions about electrification, that would be a great forum for that.
We have a question from Alexandra asking what the aggregate emissions of diesel Zambonis are in the state of California.
I do not know the answer to that question. Less than it was when I was in high school. I actually also drove one that used unleaded gasoline. Or I'm sorry, leaded gasoline.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, with that, if you have any last minute questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up here. Thank you all so much for attending today. We really appreciate it. And like we said, we'll be sure to follow up with presentation information and keep you on the list if you're interested in hearing about future electrification workshops.
Thanks, everybody.